Good evening and welcome. This meeting is being televised by Chelmsford Telemedia. If there's anyone else present who's recording or planning to record, would you indicate it at this time? Okay, I don't see anyone. So that takes care of that. Okay, first item on the agenda, the minutes for the regular school committee meeting of January 10th and the regular school committee meeting of January 16th. I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes cited by Chairman Thomas.
Second. Any corrections or questions?
They're perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we have been.
I know.
It's outstanding.
Thank you.
All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Any negative vote or abstention?
Abstain.
Okay, so it's,
Are you abstaining for both? Or you missed one of the meetings? is
yeah.
Yes, that was the last meeting.
So it's an
okay,
abstention
they're
and
together, okay,
and an
so-
absence at this point.
So it's three.
Okay, it's the time for public comment. When you come to address the school committee, would you please give us your name and address for the record? Anyone like to speak to us at this time?
Hello. I'm Maria O'Donnell. My Chelmsford address is Byam School. And I'm also the Executive Vice President of the Chelmsford Federation of Teachers. I've said this to Dr. Lang and Dr. Hirsch, but I think it's important for this committee and the community to know the CFT has tremendous gratitude to the administrative team for the support that has been showered upon the center school staff after the untimely passing of our CFT sister, Kathy Fahey, on January 1st. Kathy was a beloved teacher and valued Chelmsford community member. Our hearts are broken for her son, Michael, her family, her friends, her students. What people might not know is on the day of Kathy's funeral, the administrative team showed up at Center School and relieved anyone and everyone who wanted to attend her services. They became teachers, paras, lunch ladies, secretaries. They rolled up their sleeves and they said, "What can I do?" And I want you to know that it didn't go unnoticed. And although I hope that we never are faced with that situation again, it's a great comfort to know that this district can pull together during our darkest times. So that I felt like that was important for me to bring here. Also, I know that you're going to be discussing the budget. And so I wanted to sit here to say I hope full day K is here to stay. Every day my colleagues and I see the difference that full day K makes for our students, so I'll be anxiously looking for that budget item in the budget. But I also want to talk about the emotional needs of the elementary students. Children with some severe needs that need to have a place in our upcoming budget. Last spring, after hearing that Dr. Lang met with 2 different groups of parents, a CFT member initiated a meeting to discuss the student behavioral needs at the elementary level. This teacher wanted to give him the teacher's perspective of the stressful situation that many of our elementary teachers are put under, and that this population of students is growing. Teachers from several schools were in attendance. We had a principal in attendance, and we believe that that meeting was very positive, and we believed that this school year would be different than last. It is different at Byam, but only because some children moved out of district. It's not necessarily different across the district. Sorry. Our conversation with Dr. Lang focused on the fact that that population of students is growing, students with emotional needs. Young children with emotional behavioral needs are in our elementary schools, yet there's not a program for them in place. There's a program for them in the middle schools and the high schools, but not in the elementary schools. Elementary teachers are trying all that they know to manage behavior, but students are bolting, threatening, hiding, kicking, throwing sharp things, hitting, disrupting multiple classes a day across this district. One elementary principal said that the only program in place is the principal's office program, and it's insufficient. Teachers and paras feel vulnerable, untrained, and at their wits' end. School counselors, principals, and psychologists are doing all that they can as well, but resources are stretched very thin, and no actual program is in place. We're spinning our wheels, and these children are not making progress, not academically or emotionally. Their needs are not being met, and therefore they make no progress. Additionally, teachers and paras who are on the front lines with these children don't have the proper restraint training that's mandated by the state. At our meeting, Dr. Lang said that he would speak with the Director of Student Services, Amy Reese, about getting refresher classes for people whose CPI training has lapsed. To my knowledge, most people who were once trained are still untrained and not refreshed. At the November CPAC meeting, Amy Reese, the parents were asking about children with special needs and specifically student behavior. They were asking if the teachers at recess are trained for these emotional needs. Amy Reese led them to believe that yes, they were, and sadly, it's really not true. They don't have the same certifications that are needed. They are there on the front lines when kids bolt off the playground, but they don't have the skill set to go after them. What happens if a child runs to the woods is that the 4 adults that are supervising 100 students on the playground have to call on a walkie-talkie to call to the adults in the building that have the restraint training, and they have to come out and try to catch the child. If you've ever tried to chase an 8-year-old that's had a head start, that's not an easy task, and it's a significant safety concern. Amy Reese has got to make a commitment to these students and their families and their teachers before somebody gets hurt. Inside the classroom, when children observe explosive behavior from their peers, it's scary, confusing, and extremely distracting. Children are left to wonder why this chaos is happening in their classroom. Most children know the rules, follow the rules, but they're not emotionally mature enough to realize that some children don't have the skills for whatever reason. They can only assume that the child who's struggling with emotional regulation are bad kids and they don't want to be near them. And we are perpetuating that understanding by not giving them the services that they need. I don't have much longer, I promise. So when we believed that this program would be in place for this year, and I'm not sure how it fell off the budget for last year. My only guess is it's somewhere between the special ed department, Dr. Lang, the list of needs. But I can just only hope that it would be in discussion and in the budget for this coming year. I've said this before, sitting in this chair, and during negotiations, teachers are often told that there's only one pot of money. But the thing is that you put your money where your values are. And so as you look at the budget for 2018 and 2019, you need to ask yourself, what do we value as a district? Do we value adding to the administrative team, adding assistants to directors at every turn? Or do we value the young students that are struggling to function in our classrooms? Do we value the teachers and the support staff that are doing all that they know how with limited resources and that are desperate for help? You just really need to think about, you guys get to decide what we value in our district. We hold you to that responsibility. So when you look at the budget, please consider that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to address the committee at this time? Okay. Student representatives, what's new?
So since last meeting, the lecture hall at the high school that's been under construction is finally done, and we're just waiting on inspection for that. We've started meetings on the new vaping policies for all grades. We also had the engineering fair, which was a success. It was the first annual one, so they'll hope to continue that in the future. And coming up, we have junior guidance meetings about college prep and how to use Naviance. And we have the MCAS biology retest this week.
On the 8th, the 8th grade parents are going to have parent night at the high school for upcoming freshmen. On the 14th, semester 1 grades will be posted with mid-year grades. After vacation, the student portal will open, and on the 13th through the 16th, there's going to be an elective fair for picking classes next year.
Okay, thank you. Good news?
I have two pieces of good news tonight. McCarthy Middle School just wrapped up their archaeology program. So they get this grant through the Mass Cultural Council, and they bring in a resident. The students already did this at Parker. Just finished up at McCarthy, and they get to do their artifacts. They get to break it up. I don't know if you guys remember this when you were at middle school. You didn't get to do all this fun stuff. So they get to go through the process of what it looks like to dig something up. So they just wrapped that up, and we appreciate the PTO. They provide a lot of supplies that are needed for this program, so they wanted to put a big thank you out for that. And I've been talking about it, and they're finally here. Our international teachers are here. We have 4 at the high school and 1 at the middle school. So it's a great opportunity for students to both see different, viewpoints and how to do their teaching. It's also a great experience both for the teachers and for the international teachers. Been great program that's been happening at UMass Lowell. AJ Angulo is in charge of this program, and it's just been it was a success last year, and hopefully this year we're going to have the same piece. In March, on the first school committee meeting, we're going to be bringing them in like we did last year, so they're excited for that.
Could you tell us what countries they're from?
I know that 2 are from Bangladesh. I know 1 is from Jordan, and that was all I could remember.
Oh, that's fine.
That's 3 out of 5. I'm thinking that's pretty good grade.
Pretty good, very good. Okay,
So,
I'd
that's
just
it.
like to announce that the applications for the Rotary Leadership Program are available in the main office. This is a leadership program for sophomores. It involves a weekend at Pittsburgh State University, the weekend of June 22nd, 3rd, and 24th. The deadline for applications is the 16th of February, and we'll be interviewing the weeks following that. All right. New business, personnel report.
Thank you. Just a couple of
Yes, sir.
reports. This is a catch-up. We didn't make the last school committee meeting with the December personnel report, so just presenting that to you this evening. No action required by the school committee, but it just provides a list of all the new hires, any resignations, promotions, so that you have a sense of the comings and goings staff-wise within the district. Happy to answer any questions, but really just providing it for information purposes.
Is a new physics teacher in place? Yes.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, moving on, second item this evening is, this is a follow-up from our last school committee meeting. This was the school committee and the superintendent goal document. We had provided that in a little bit of a workshop type format, took different feedback from different members of the committee. Thank you, Dennis, very much for really putting a lot of time into putting that together. And then Linda, thank you for taking the different comments back and kind of putting it into our regular format. So we said we would do that and put that back on the agenda for the committee to kind of bless and endorse for the year to give us our plan to move forward with. So that's presented for you this evening to review and approve.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the goals as presented.
Make a motion to accept the goals as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? I would just like to say personally that I like this idea of having different information in one place. It makes it a lot easier, I think, and shows commitment from different parts of the organization. If there are no questions or to be discussed, I'd like to have a vote on the motion. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any negative vote or abstention? 4-0, 1 absent. Okay.
Thank you. I just need one moment. The next is this is the time of year that we present the superintendent's recommended budget. So I just need a second to be able to put that presentation up As you recall, we're actually starting about a month earlier this year, which is, good and timely. That'll give us more information and more time to be able to review the recommendations before you. This evening, you'll be receiving the budget for the first time. I put a presentation together that I'll walk through with you. And then, as you recall, we're actually off cycle, so that our next regular meeting would have fallen during February vacation, so that got bumped out to Tuesday. So our budget hearing will actually be posted for the Tuesday we return from February vacation. And then I did also post a section on the first meeting in March. It's just a week later, in the event of snow or any kind of weather-related issue. But let me pull this up and walk you through the presentation. Oops. Need a little quicker. You have a little quicker?
They took them away from me. I have one. I'll go get one.
Okay.
It's a document.
Just 1 second while we get
Always happens.
the update done. No matter what you're doing.
Nope.
No. I don't know if you heard, the storm's coming.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Tomorrow, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. I don't know what to tell you guys yet.
No inside information.
Yeah, for whatever reason, a lot of the other districts are actually calling an early release tomorrow, but they'd already had professional development days scheduled in the district, so it was already gonna be a half day for the students. The staff are just going home early, but when we're done the meeting, I'll go take another look at the forecasts, and we'll let you know as soon as we know what's gonna happen tomorrow. I can't do anything until you tell it to update later. Okay.
Technology has made our lives so much easier.
In some ways.
These updates keep releasing way too frequently.
Right.
Action on 495.
There's a stack of
Things to sign?
things that you need to sign.
And we're just getting ready to do budget. We've moved that far.
Oh, thanks,
So you
buddy.
know where we are.
Okay. Here we go. So on your desks this evening, I placed a recommended budget book. So if you want to, I'm just gonna walk you through the, some of the initial pages. So if you wanna walk with me, that would be the document in front of you. So as I did last year, I wanna cover some of our information as far as financially how the Chelmsford Public Schools stacks up against other communities in the state. And what you're gonna hear me talk a lot about is our comparable communities. So the Department of Education goes through a process every year of identifying what your 10 most comparable communities are as far as your demographic, the size of your district, the number of schools you operate, the grade span configurations of the school that you operate. And they actually, on a year-to-year basis, update that and tell you what are the 10 most comparable districts. So when we talk about the DART districts or our comparable districts, those are the 10 that we're gonna refer to. And then we also, as we go through the slides, have state averages on everything. So that will be in there as well. But one of the factors that you'll hear talked about a lot is our Chapter 70 money that comes from the state to help support the schools. It actually goes to the town, and then the town gives us an appropriation each year budget-wise. And a lot of that is predicated on what's called net school spending. And net school spending is basically what the DOE determines every given year is what the minimum amount of money that needs to be spent to provide what they call an adequate education in your community. So when we look at back to fiscal year 16, which is the last year that the DOE actually has provided data for, because when you submit your end of the year report for financials, it has to go in, it has to be audited, and then they update all this information. Fiscal 16 is the last year that they've actually updated at this point. Across the Commonwealth of all public school districts, there were only 20 school districts who did not meet net school spending. So that means they didn't meet the 100% spending requirement. Luckily, we're not close to one of those districts, but there were about 20 districts that didn't meet that 100% target. 302 districts, met or exceeded that target. And I think what's important is oftentimes the community will hear, have you met net school spending, or what is net school spending? And the big takeaway for me on this one is that really no districts, if you're providing the type of educational program we are just meeting net school spending. You're talking about how much you're exceeding net school spending, or how much of a percentage of net school spending are you actually exceeding the mark. And in Chelmsford, we did exceed the state average on net school spending in 16. We spent 27% higher than the net school spending amount. Across the state, the median value was 25.1, so we're a little bit higher than that. And we actually have been upticking the last number of years within that. The other big takeaway for me in this data is obviously 173 communities across the state spent less as a percentage than we did, and 148 communities spent above. So we're right in the middle as far as where our spending is. Again, as a resident in town, I would be certainly pleased that I wasn't just spending at the net minimum, because that is really the floor that you wouldn't want to be spending at. But I don't think we're overspending on education. I think we're spending a fair amount of money. I think our allocation from the town is certainly a fair amount, and it's right within, as we even go through this presentation, it's within our comparable communities' share. A couple of other just kind of demographic information. These are the 10 districts that the DOE is basically identifying as our comparable districts. So when we look through all of this different financial information, and then when we look through the information based on academic performance, these are the 10 districts that we're being compared to, and then the state. So Billerica, obviously, which is a neighboring town, people will be familiar with Billerica. Easton, Marshfield, Melrose, Milton. I was a little surprised about Milton being in our mix this year, but they are. Natick, North Andover, North Attleboro, Wakefield, and Walpole. So the second column on this particular page shows just the total district enrollment, and you can see they're all within the same ballpark as we are. What's interesting is when it comes to economically disadvantaged students, this term has changed from time to time within the DOE. Sometimes free and reduced lunch counts had been advertised, but a new term is being used. I think it's significant to note that 11.2% of our Chelmsford students were identified as economically disadvantaged. Within the grouping, we're obviously on the high end as far as economically disadvantaged students go. What was telling to me is if we look back at the data last year, we actually reported 9.7% of our students as economically disadvantaged, and the year prior, 8.2. We're not talking, huge numbers of students, but our percentage is actually increasing as far as the number of economically disadvantaged students. When it comes to students with SWD, or students with identified learning disabilities, Chelmsford actually has 16.7% of our students have some type of a learning disability and require special education services. And this is high. There's only one other district in our comparable communities, Eastern, which actually has a higher number. So we're on the high end of students with disabilities. Now, when you're looking at this particular chart, this is the one chart that's not actually sorted high to low, because you've got 3 different columns on there. This is actually just sorted in alphabetical order. So don't try to read into the kind of where Chelmsford is at the top of the list. It's really just highlighted because of the alphabetical order nature. And then the third column is ELL students. So this is the number of students within the district that are identified as English language learners. And we are actually, of our 10 communities, number 8. There were only 2 that actually have a higher ELL population than we do. So when I take a look at the number of economically disadvantaged, the students with disabilities, and then our ELL population, and I see that we're really on the top end of those 3 categories, that really speaks to a lot of the needs of our students, and I think speaks to a little bit of a changing demographic within our schools. And obviously with those needs come additional needs for services and supports. Again, now this is a listing. We talked a little bit about what Chapter 70 was and net school spending, but we wanted to take a look at where Chelmsford actually ranked within our 10 most comparable districts. So again, we're right about in the middle, and this is some information that came from the first page as well. There were 4 districts that spent as a percentage of net school spending more than Chelmsford in 2016. That was Wakefield, Milton, Natick, and Billerica. You can see we came in at 27.1% above net school spending. And then there were 6 communities that spent less, including the state averages a couple points less than we were. Again, the significant takeaway for me is we're right in the middle. We're in the middle of our comparable districts. We're not high, we're not low, as far as our spending is concerned. When it comes to the next table in front of you is student-teacher ratios. So again, this is kind of a difficult number to look at. Obviously, we don't have classes that have 13.6 kids in them. But as a relative factor, what this data is basically important to show you is all of your total student enrollment divided by just the total number of teachers you have in the district is what the DOE uses to come up with this factor. Again, the takeaway is you want to look at the comparisons between communities and how do we actually stack up as far as our students are concerned. So we're right in the middle again. We've got 4 communities that actually have a little bit better student-teacher ratio than we do, and there are 6 communities that have a higher student-teacher ratio. Again, significant to note that the student-teacher ratio across the state is a little bit better than ours. But again, we're right in the middle. When it comes to average teacher salaries, this is another comparison that's often utilized when you're looking at different districts. And again, we're kind of in the middle on this as far as our comparable communities. There are 6 communities that have, this is again based on 2016 data, that have slightly higher average teacher salaries than Chelmsford. The state average is also higher than Chelmsford. That is significant. And then there are 4 communities, Marshfield, Natick, Wakefield, and Milton, that have lower numbers. Again, kind of right in the middle. When it comes to per pupil expenditures, this is another category that gets reported regularly, and a lot of times what different districts will use to figure out if you're spending appropriate to your clientele, your customer base. And again, Chelmsford is right in the middle on this one, actually dead in the middle. So there are 5 communities that actually spent more per pupil than we did in fiscal 16, Billerica, Milton, Natick, Wakefield, and Walpole. And then there are 5 communities that spent less. The state average is obviously higher for all 10 of our communities. When you take a look at the, I want to switch now for a second. We've taken a look at some of the financial considerations, and I want to switch to take a look at actually some of the academic performance of our students. So we know, and again, the big takeaway for me financially is we're right in the middle of our comparable communities, basically when you look at all the different factors. Student-teacher ratio, net school spending, percentage above net school spending, we're right in the middle. Performance-wise is where we're really going to separate from our other districts. So I picked 3 different grade levels, and this is actually MCAS data and the next gen MCAS data from last spring at our different schools. So the first grade that we took a look at is 3rd grade. And this is performance of across the district, not an individual school, but all of our 3rd grades combined at the different schools, and how they performed on the last spring's new MCAS exam. So I combined the students who were either meeting or exceeding expectations as a category because there were the 4 different categories. So we took a look at the students who were meeting or exceeding expectations, and all of our 3rd grade students, again, you can see we factored in there in the top half of districts. We ended up with 64% of our students in 3rd grade either meeting or exceeding expectations, with only 3 of our 10 districts performing better than we did, Walpole, Marshfield, and Easton. When you take a look at math, we dropped right to the middle of the pile in 3rd grade at that grade level. So there were 5 districts that actually outperformed us, and then we outperformed 5 districts when it came to the 3rd grade math. And again, this is students who are scoring in the meeting or exceeding expectations category. What's really exciting for us, and I think you'll see this progression as we go through the grades, when you get to middle school and then you get to high school, our students really start to outperform their counterparts in other communities. So when we look at our English, now we move into 7th grade. So I picked the elementary school grade level, I'm going to pick a middle school grade level, and then the high school. So when we look at our performance on the 7th grade MCAS, so these are the kids at Parker and McCarthy combined, it's the whole district score. Out of our 10 comparable communities, Chelmsford was absolute top of the list. 69% of our students scored in either meeting or exceeding expectations category. An absolute phenomenal job. The state average, obviously, in all these categories is significantly lower than we are, and the factor that we want to be at is how we're stacking up against our comparable districts. It's more important in these categories to really be far above the state average based on our demographic and our population. So I'd want to see where we're actually stacking up with our counterparts in other communities, and I'm very happy for our seventh graders in English. Mathematics scores were very similar as well. You know, there were, Easton was the only district out of our 10 comparable communities that had a higher percentage of students scoring in the meeting or exceeding expectations category. Again, Chelmsford was right up there, and then 8 communities fared a little bit lower than we did in that particular assessment. The trend continues as we move on to the high school. So these are our 10th graders. These are our sophomores at the high school, and how they performed on, now this is the legacy MCAS exam, so they've been taking this for years. This isn't the new test that came out last spring. Of all of our 10th grade students who took the ELA exam last spring, 99% of our students scored in either the advanced or proficient categories on the MCAS, which I think is phenomenal. The staff and students have done a tremendous job getting the kids ready right through elementary, middle school, high school for this exam. And Chelmsford was at the absolute top of the list of our 10 communities. That's a huge accomplishment. The kids had significant gains and really outperformed their counterparts across the state. When you look at mathematics, Chelmsford scored equally as well there as well. The highest, again, even of the 10 communities, are comparable districts in students scoring either advanced or proficient on the 10th grade MCAS. All of the other 10 communities scored slightly less than we did. Very incredible scores, again, for our 10th grade students last year. Couldn't be more proud of them and the amount of time and effort that people put into getting our students ready for the next phases of their life. In science, it was close. We're not at the absolute top here. There were 4 communities that outperformed us on the 10th grade science exam. But you can see there as well, our students, still 90% of our students scored in either the advanced or proficient category. Billerica, Milton, Walpole, and Natick each scored 1 or 2 points higher. You know, still significantly above some of our other comparable districts and certainly the state. And, you know, as you know, what'll be interesting to see happen over the next number of years is as we're putting more of a focus, even at the elementary level and then middle and high school level, on science, and we have a new science coordinator now, how those scores may start to increase as well. But certainly very competitive, and very happy for the students there. When you take a look now, some of the takeaways, again, just to kind of review for you, because there's a lot of information that you're kind of processing at this point. Some takeaways as far as the budget narrative is concerned. I think we should be very proud of this. Chelmsford does exceed minimum net school spending on public education. We spend slightly more than the state average on net school spending. But when you do look at the per pupil expenditures across the state, we are still spending slightly less than the state median per pupil value. Again, my big takeaway is I think we're being fairly funded. I think one of our issues, and Paul, the town manager, has talked about this, we don't have a lot of control over the Chapter 70 formula. Obviously, if we were getting more Chapter 70 aid, that would certainly help the schools. It would take some of the burden off the town as well. But the money that we are receiving is going to put out a very good product within the schools. I think people should be very proud. Our average teacher salaries are lower, and our student-teacher ratios are slightly higher than the state average. However, within our comparable districts, both of those data points, we fall right in the middle. Again, per pupil spending is lower than the state average, but it is in the mid-range of our comparable districts. When it comes again to the academic performance, this is where it really kind of jumps out at me. Our students outperform their peers statewide, and they score above certainly state averages in both ELA and math. When it came to the elementary grade levels, when we were talking about the next gen MCAS, our students in 3rd and 7th grade significantly outperformed their peers. And when on the legacy MCAS for ELA, math, and obviously science, our high school students performed exceptionally well. So that is a little bit of a kind of narrative bringing up to speed with where we're at. And now I'm going to move into some of the budget assumptions that underlie the fiscal 19 budget that's presented before you. So if you're following along with me in your book, it's, what's that? That's totally up to you. Well, hold on, we'll get it.
Can I ask you a question about the DESI districts?
Yep.
It seems like we have slid we were used to be compared to Westford and Andover, and now we're being compared to a more moderate performing group. What caused that? Because our scores seem to indicate that we're doing well.
We're doing very well.
So
I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know that we've ever, at least in my time here, I don't believe we've ever been compared to Andover or Westford.
we used to.
Yeah, we don't get to pick the comparable
No,
districts.
no, I understand that, but there's got to be criteria that they use.
Criteria is the amount of students that you have there, your ELL population, your students with disabilities. So all of those come into play. So our changes, like, for example, in L students, we have more L students. So that might bump us by being compared to like an Andover because they may not have as many L students. So the criteria just follows those four pieces there.
Does
You know, it's
DESE
not
offer
like
an
that.
explanation on their website?
What a DART district is?
No, how they come up with the comps.
They do. It's
They
based
do.
on those four criteria.
Okay.
The ones that originally he had across with the L students, right? Students with disabilities.
Your
How many
population.
students you have in your district. So that's how they do it.
So, okay.
Because that changes. It's a moving target. So you could have more
Yep,
students
yep.
to move into your district. You could have more students that are L students or students with disabilities. That's the swing.
Based on demographics, not on
It's based-
achievement.
It's not based on achievement.
Right,
The
so it's-
achievement gets added in at the
Right,
end.
right. So it's just
It's
a
really based on the
demographic thing, yeah.
demographics of the district. You know, they do take into consideration, you know, they're not gonna pair us up with, say, a vocational school or even like a regional school. Sometimes they'll factor those together. But there were a couple communities this year that kind of popped in for the first time that weren't there last year, and vice versa. So you're always gonna have a pretty significant core that stays the same. But this actually gets sent to us by DESE.
You'll know.
I'm not hand selecting these districts.
No, I understand that.
Right.
No, but she's just wondering why the change, and that's usually the change.
Right, I
think
mean,
it's- I think
honestly,
it speaks to our population
Right.
changing.
But if we were to put side by side, if we were to pull our neighboring communities, which don't necessarily fall within the demographics, we would be right up there academically with them. I mean, when you're at 99 and 95 at the high school level, even the 95 or the 90, you're talking probably 2 or 3 children.
that's why I don't understand. I didn't understand it, but I understand. So they're keying on special education
Yeah.
and other
They're
factors.
not trying to do median cost of a home or income of people. It's, you know, trying to keep the playing field level.
Okay, thanks.
Now, one of the other things that we can do, obviously not for tonight, I wouldn't be prepared, but we are allowed to go into the system and actually pick other communities, even though they're not our comparable communities. Like if we wanted to pick an Andover or Westford, we can go in and get their data and then do analysis on that, if we wanted to see how we actually lined up with a different peer group. So if we want to have that discussion, we can. It just takes a little bit of time to go into the system to get it. I wouldn't be prepared tonight. But we could put that on an agenda at a future time, if you ever wanted to look at another specific community and how we performed.
Do they, on the DESE website, have historical data on your comps?
Yes.
So we can
If
go
you
and
could go
look?
back and see who your previous comps
Yes.
were.
Yes.
Yeah, we could find that out for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the budget itself. So contained within your budget document, we'll have copies for others before they leave this evening, and it will be posted on our website later on this night as well. Within this document, I'm gonna walk you through some of the recommendations and some of the changes that I've incorporated. So these are the assumptions that underlie our coming budget. One of the things that I have factored into this budget are obviously all of the known costs, any of the steps and lanes associated with the different contracts that were negotiated, whether they be collective bargaining agreements or individual employment agreements. The budget document itself is set up very similar to last year's document. So you have category level data that ties out with the DOE, various function codes. You have a staff salary book that basically ties to all the lines. So if you want to go through it, you can see what figures are actually combining to that. And within that base document, I have all of the fiscal 19 figures already built in. So it's a very nice crosswalk. We actually do not have a significant number of teachers this year retiring. We only have 4 or maybe 5 that have given us notice at retiring. So that is down from previous years. We're usually able to factor in a savings from someone going out at a higher step and what the replacement costs would be at a lower step. So we're not going to see significant savings on that this year. But the other thing that is going to offset that is obviously our buyback amount or buyout amount of contracts is going to go down. We would have seen a little bit more money if we actually had more retirees. But again, I think at last count there were only 4, maybe 5 people that had actually expressed an interest to retire this year. But for those 4 or 5 positions where we do have an actual retirement letter on file, we have assumed the reduction of the salary down to Master's Step 3. That's typically been a pretty good entry point for us across the district. Some positive news actually this year when it comes to special education. This has been something that we've been working very closely with Amy Reese on. We've actually had a couple of students, and you've heard me over the years talk about how it's very difficult to predict new kids coming into the district. And this never happens. We actually had a student leave the district. So the costs associated with a particularly high placement are actually going to be borne by another district next year, which again, just you always hear me talking about kids that come in that we can't account for. We actually have one leaving us. So that is actually going to only require our out-of-district tuition to go up about $50,000 next year. Our bottom line is still going up, but not to the magnitude that it could have. And if you recall, when we received circuit breaker funding amount this year, we had included $2.5 million in the budget last year as the earmark from the state, but circuit breaker actually came in at $2.8 million, slightly over $2.8 million. And that was at a lesser percentage rate than is typical. It was about the 65% reimbursement rate. We do not see the state going down from that reimbursement rate at all. In fact, there's a little bit of movement at the state level to try to increase that rate. So we have built in just basically last year's actual number, the 2.8 million instead of 2.5. And that's actually going to generate a little bit of savings for us within the budget that we're then going to recommend earmarking to some different programs. The fiscal 19 budget does include the contractual increase for our large bus company. So we know what the value of that particular contract is going to be. It's going to increase us about $88,000 for next year, so that is built in. When it comes to our special education transportation contract, that contract is also up. We're in the middle of going to be starting some negotiations with transportation vendors in the coming weeks. But I have just basically level funded that budget, again, based on the student population we're busing. The fact that we're now going to actually have one less school that we're going to be transporting to. So I am very comfortable that we'll be able to negotiate a contract that is at or less than our current amount for fiscal 19. So that will be news to come, but you're not going to see an increase in that budget for next year. A couple of the different switches that we're recommending within the budget for next year. So these are some, you can consider them adds, but they're really a reapportionment of some of our positions. We are reinstating or recommending the reinstatement of the curriculum coordinator for English. You recall this is a position that was eliminated back in 14-15, and we've had the curriculum coordinator for social studies who's been kind of doing a split load, doing both jobs. And we'd like to go back to having a dedicated curriculum coordinator for English. So that is incorporated into this particular budget. The second bullet is, as we've talked recently about our ELL population going up, each of our 4 elementary schools has a dedicated ELL teacher. We have a dedicated ELL teacher at the high school, but we have one individual who basically services both McCarthy and Parker. So we're recommending adding and incorporating one full-time additional ELL teacher so that we basically can go from half-time to full-time at Parker and McCarthy. Each school would have a dedicated ELL teacher. Third bullet is we had utilized funding that was earmarked for a nurse position at Parker School last year to help create the coordinator of school nursing services position. So this budget actually incorporates reinstating an RN position at Parker, a regular position in the school. We'll obviously have to look to shuffle some of the funding that was being utilized to support the floating substitute nurse position, have that, our new coordinator of nursing services may have to take on some of those floating duties from time to time, but going back to having a full-time RN at Parker for next year. One of the ways that we're going to be able to pay for this, because we've just added 3 positions, is basically to repurpose 3 positions through the budget. So last year we reduced the split team 5th grade at McCarthy Middle School, and we're recommending continuing that trend for next year. So basically to reallocate the 2 middle school 6th grade teachers, because obviously the 5th grade now are in 8 sections, they'd be going up to 10, but the numbers certainly satisfy the the head counts at 8. So we're recommending reducing the 2 middle school teachers at McCarthy in the 6th grade, and the 8 sections will then float up to 8. And then as I've been working with Steve at the high school around even just current student enrollment in classes, there is some wiggle rooms to be able to make a reduction in a teaching position at the high school knowing also next year that the incoming class of freshmen is even less than the current class, there'll be wiggle room to make a reduction at the high school in a teaching position. Did not flag which teaching position it would be. We really want to allow the course registration process to see its way through. I think we're all very comfortable that just through attrition and other factors, any of these three cuts really are not going to affect an individual losing their job. They may just have to take a different position in the district for which they're licensed for. Totally understand and accept that that might not be the preference of the individual, but we're able to basically reallocate these three positions to go support three other pretty significant needs that we've identified last year and then this year moving forward. And I think we're going to see very good gain from that. The next area that we're recommending actually adding, and we started having this conversation last year, is some additional administrative supports at the elementary school level. So this budget would recommend adding a half-time assistant principal position at each of our 4 elementary schools. I envision it probably being 2 bodies that are actually split between 2 schools instead of 4 actual half-time people. But this will provide a level of additional support to not only focus on our academic goal, but our social emotional learning goal, to have some additional supports within the building. I've heard this from administrators, obviously from teachers, the need for additional supports. I think this will go a long way towards helping address goals 1 and 2 of our strategic plan. Also incorporated within the budget, 2 significant earmarks to help our social emotional goal 2. The first one is each of our elementary schools and middle schools in the district have started to do a lot of work with their SEL teams in the buildings. And they're at the stage where we would like to identify a couple of staff members, current staff members in the school, but be able to provide them with a small stipend to be able to take on the role of kind of being that social emotional learning coach within the building, to work with our district level consultant around the whole initiative. So we have built in funding for that social emotional coach stipend. Additionally, at the elementary school level, there's some additional curriculum that needs to be purchased. There's some second step curriculum that needs to be added on within the buildings, and funding for that has been incorporated. Both of these you'll see earmarked within the guidance department, because the guidance department has been taking the lead on a lot of the SEL initiatives in the district. I think people will be pleased, and we're certainly pleased to make this kind of final recommendation, is that we do add a therapeutic behavioral program at the elementary school level. That is incorporated within this budget. As we talked last year, or not last year, but the last couple of months, we have a team of individuals in the district right now going through neighboring districts, taking a look at other programs that are offered and set up. So we do not have what the actual recommendation will be yet. But I have an earmark within this budget by basically reallocating some of that special education savings of $300,000 to be able to allocate towards the behavioral therapeutic program as we get into, just give me one sec, Barbara,
Yep.
as we get into later in the spring. I didn't want to not put it in the budget and then have to come back for it. So it is an earmark that we will basically come back to after we have a recommendation and move the money into whatever areas of the budget is needed later in the spring. Barbara?
How many elementary schools will be able to accommodate this?
This would be a district-wide program, so I envision it, again, I don't have the specifics, I envision it being housed in one school.
Okay.
It's highly likely that South Row would be the school to house the program, just based on the numbers and the available classes. But this would be similar to, say, the Byam housing, our program for students on the autism spectrum. South Row would house our program for students with therapeutic needs.
Okay.
So it would not be a program in every building. It'd be one program in the district. I also don't want to set expectations because a lot of times when these discussions happen, people talk about, well, can we recapture students, or can we bring kids back in who maybe we've had to send out? There might be opportunity for students who are in out-of-district placements who this might very well serve them well. Certainly we'll work with those families if this is the solution. But in my perspective, I think we really need to take the time to get the program set up and try to have it stop students from having to go out, new students going out. If we're able to recapture some students, and this is really the best program for them, great. I think that would work for the families, it would work for the students, and it would work for us. But I'm not under the illusion that I didn't build in any funding basically for kids coming back. This
So-
is strictly an earmark to be able to establish a program in our district.
It would be open to all elementary students, and the special education or some department, maybe guidance, determines whether or not they qualify for this program?
Yeah, and that's what's in the work right now. So,
Okay.
I mean, this is gonna take a little bit more time, but we have to actually, as part of the program design, figure out the whole kind of entry-exit requirements. You know, is it gonna be a kind of a short stay program? Is it gonna be a longer stay program? What are the criteria? Are students necessarily, do they have to already be identified for special ed services? Could they just be going through a process? So this is all being worked out. Every community does it a little bit differently. And we do have people and teams now actually going out to different districts to look at programs. They're gonna bring us back their recommendation, and then I'll ultimately bring that to you.
Yeah, I think that special ed component is because not all of these children are, qualify for special education services.
Right.
So how do you have a general population student in a classroom with kids who are also special ed, how do you meet all of their needs in
Well, I
that
think
classroom?
you can. I mean, I think it depends on the program delivery, and it depends on the program setup. But I think that's what we need to wait and have the staff kind of bring us back recommendations. There are different districts that I'm aware of that just kind of do it very differently.
Okay.
Some will staff the program with regular ed teachers, some will do a combination of regular ed special ed teachers. Sometimes BCBAs or behavioral specialists are
Right.
involved. But I think what's significant to me is this has been something that's been talked about for a while. And even as one of the previous speakers this evening spoke about when it comes to priorities, this has certainly been on our list, and we've been trying to work to address a lot of the social emotional needs in the district. Last year, these funds are limited. Last year was the year that we really made the push for full-day kindergarten. And we implemented full-day kindergarten. We didn't forget about these other initiatives. I think even when we put the budget document together last year, there was a punch list of issues and different programming that we needed to work on. And I think the budget presented before you this evening that we'll deliberate in a couple of weeks really continues to make progress on those initiatives. There's nothing contained in this budget that hasn't been previously talked about or hadn't been previously earmarked. I think we created a plan. We had certain kind of deliverables we wanted to work toward, and I really do believe this budget works in that area. When it comes to this, again, I really felt it was important to have the funding be earmarked within the budget process, and then we will have time over the spring to really move that money around based on what the actual recommendation from the teams who are doing all the work in the schools is. But I think this will be a welcomed, a welcomed recommendation. Lastly, I just want to point out to you that this budget does continue, again, utilizing a couple of different revenue offsets because we don't have unlimited funds. So, we are utilizing circuit breaker, and again, you'll see in there the earmark going from 2.5 to 2.8 million. We are recommending utilizing $250,000 of school choice money as a revenue offset to balance the budget. And then lastly, again, as we did last year, we may not need to tap into it, but we did earmark a piece of the Valley Collaborative reimbursement. And that came in at ballpark a little over 500,000. We're earmarking less than 200,000 of that amount to be used as a revenue offset. I think that's certainly valid and legitimate, particularly considering it's special education tuitions that are basically generating that reimbursement for us to be able to utilize some of that funding to then go back and support special education programmings to keep students, in our district and to work with them is something, again, that I hope will be well received. And that's the end of my presentation. Again, for your purposes, the document itself you have before you this evening, the first 20 or so pages are your narrative and piece of that presentation I just went through. Page 19 is your summary document that basically adds up all of the different pages in the document. And you'll look at the bottom. You do see that our FTEs actually increased by 1.8 from last year to this year. And the reason they're not up by 2, because the 2 is the full-time, the 2 assistant principals. We had an extra 0.2 that we were carrying in one of the world languages because there was a teacher teaching an extra section a year ago. That's not necessary for next year, so that's why it's not just a 2.0 increase, it's a 1.8. But I didn't want you to wonder what that extra 0.2 was as you delve through this. Your category level detail begins on page 20, and when we convene to have the budget presentation, these are the pages that you'll actually start walking through. So these would be the pages the school committee would be kind of asking questions on and ultimately voting. And you'll see all of the recommendations that I spoke about this evening have already been incorporated into the budget document so that they're there. You'll see page 55 of the budget, basically, is your sum sheet, and it adds up to 59 million. The budget balances to the dollar of what the town manager is recommending, and ultimately will go forward to town meeting. The 59 million is the amount that'll be discussed at town meeting. You know, we certainly have the ability to move priorities around or money within this particular budget, but I think it's important to know, you know, coming out of the gate tonight, this budget, you know, is in balance with what the town is recommending at town meeting. And I think a big takeaway for me is it incorporates all of our known, again, kind of contract increases and any of our known increases for next year, and it continues to add onto some of the programming that we identified as a priority. Reinstatement of a coordinator, reallocation of staff to really meet our ELL needs, adding a therapeutic program, you know, right down the list. We're kind of hitting all these different points that we've talked about. And then page 56 is where your staff salary book starts in. And again, this is your crosswalk back to your main document. And you can utilize that as you go through the budget itself. And then I've added 3 appendices just so that they're all part of the same document. So page 72, Joanna put together just a 2-page summary of all of our grants in the district, a little description of what the grant is, what the funding is utilized for, just so you can have it in a complete document. Appendices 2 is just kind of a 3-year look back at all of our revolving funds and other funds, so that you can get a sense of what our account balances were year to year, where we're actually generating a little bit of surplus, and to help kind of show our financial condition. And then the third appendices is the enrollment report that I presented to you back in December. And again, I thought this would be helpful when we're taking a look at our student increases from year to year, particularly being able to talk about, you know, why we can recommend, say, reducing those 2 6th-grade teachers at McCarthy, because the number of 5th-grade teachers going up. Certainly will keep class sizes at, you know, 22, 23, 24. They'll still be below the school committee's recommended guideline. And the elements of this particular budget, some of those additional staff positions and the reallocation of positions wouldn't be possible if we didn't really prioritize where our needs are and be able to move that money around. We don't have endless money, and I think this is a good faith effort to continue to, again, implement programs that we have identified as necessary, do it in a financially responsible way, and I look forward to going through this document with you in a couple of weeks when we do the budget. The only thing I would add, and then certainly answer any questions, the only thing I would add is, as you start to go through this document over the next couple of weeks, please, if you have questions or concerns, you know, email me ahead of time, talk to me ahead of time. I'm happy to get information to you so that, like, that night, we're not stuck on something, and, you know, I can give you a report or give you backup information to keep the conversation going.
2 questions. One, when will this be posted online for our viewers at home?
Tonight.
Okay. And 2, will we be getting a line item detail?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, are you going to break down the line items in this budget?
I have.
We have principals as a sum, as a summary, but not each principal.
It is. That's the staff salary book.
It's in another part.
Okay, it's in another part.
You have to crosswalk it.
Okay, and,
So it is in there.
okay.
Let me give you an example. What page are you on for principals?
I was on the summary page.
I know, but you know what page number it is?
No, I was just flipping through. So it's
right,
page 30.
Right, so if you look at page 30,
And I just chose that randomly. I was just flipping through.
all right, so if you look at page 30 and you look at page 57,
Okay,
so page 30 says you've got 7 principals at 838,106.
okay,
And on page 57, midway through the page, you've got 7 principals at 838,106.
okay,
It's basically a crosswalk.
all right.
And it goes position by position like that.
I'll comment to break the silence.
Is there
I'm
silence?
ecstatic
Yeah.
on a couple of levels. I think the presentation is outstanding. As a town meeting rep, I remember a lot of the issues that were raised. I thought last year's presentation for the town was exceptional, and this goes way beyond that. Particularly with the appendices at the end with the grants and revolving fund. These are things that people have been asking about, and I know that, you know, without spending a lot of time, I know that the town meeting people, if they went through last year's budget and see this year's, the explanation is so clear and so well documented. The other thing that I'm ecstatic about is the creativity shown in using the various available funds we have. We've addressed, the team, and the superintendent deserves a lot of credit, but also all the people
the team.
that have fed into this. Yeah, exactly, because I've been in the building when some of these meetings have been taking place, a lot of people involved. But to be able to hear the people, one that spoke tonight, the concern was anticipated and addressed. I can't imagine anyone being disappointed with what came out tonight, and I'm really excited about going forward to the town with this. They should be proud of the achievement of our kids and the way that the town is funding things within the limits of the state money and so forth.
Nice job. I agree.
Terrific, man.
Well, if everyone's happy, we can go home. All right, so,
Anyone else want to comment or have any questions or anything?
No, I have
So
to
f-
look through it first.
Sure.
well, no, and I don't expect you to do that tonight.
No.
This is the budget presentation. You never get the budget book ahead of time. So that's always going to be delivered the night of the meeting, and this literally was refined this afternoon. So you're not expected to comment or deliberate on the budget tonight. You can all walk with a hard copy. It will be up online within an hour or so for people, the audience to see. It does get actually emailed out to the town meeting reps. We email them a link to the budget so that they have it.
Good.
And we invite them to come to the budget hearing when we have it. Anyone in the room is welcome to take a hard copy when they leave tonight as well. I've got hard copies for you. But, no, I look forward to this. I'm really, again, just take a second. I'm excited about the fact that, over the last 2 years, we've really been able to accomplish the things that we've been talking about for a long time. I think, this year, the full implementation of the full-day kindergarten has been huge. I mean, how many years have we talked about that? And, it's come to fruition. The teachers are doing an outstanding job, and Marie and the whole cohort of kindergarten teachers have gone above and beyond to make this year just the smoothest opening for a program of that substantial of a size as I've ever seen. Very supportive. I could not be happier with the way that has gone. The fact that we were able to pull that off in the midst of a huge construction project, all last year and last summer, everything just kind of fell into place. And I think that was huge. That was a lot of money. I think it was a good investment. Obviously, it's still within this budget, and it's something that I think, without belaboring, when we look at our test scores, I'm really going to be interested to see at the elementary level how we start to increase over the years to come, because you can see clearly from the data, by the time our kids hit middle school and high school, we're far surpassing our comparable districts, and that's going to continue. At the elementary level, I wonder where we're, 2, 3, 4 from the top. If now we have an extra half a year, right? We have an extra half a year of school built in because of full-day K. That's just going to prepare the kids that much further when they hit first grade and second grade and third grade. And I'll be interested to see over the years how those scores really continue to improve. But I'm very proud of the work of the district. The admin team that put time putting this budget together, it's not a one-person job, so they certainly deserve credit. The schools bringing forward the different recommendations and keeping these issues on the front burner. And I think the fact that we're really able to, as a district, focus on our goals. And we identified academic goals, we identified student learning goals, and I think, again, the big takeaway from me is we're actually putting our money where our goals are, and I think that speaks to the kind of the vision of the district and a vision of anyone who wants to move an initiative forward. It's having that continuity in your budget really aligning with your goals and aligning with your practice. So I'm proud to be a part of this.
Points. First question, Linda, Dr. Hirsch, could you tell me or tell the committee, with the implementation of full-day K, what is your opinion of how the grades or the scores will change as a result of it? Is there any data that says, hey, guess what, in a few years you should see, or?
No, I mean, right now, it's gonna take us a little time. You need to have some trends. So this is our first time implementing it. What I can talk to you about is going into the classrooms and seeing what is able to be done compared to that kind of rush mode, watching kids being able to interact with each other, play, is going to be a huge increase just in their ability to feel confident about going to school, rather than kind of putting them through the machine and sending them right back out. I mean, you heard from Marie tonight, she spoke about that, and it's just, that's wonderful. So all of that factors in until we start to get scores. I mean, we watch that's just the state scores, but we're watching our students all the time. We have internal benchmarking, and that helps us make decisions for students. But with our K kids there, if we're making a decision on a student, we see that they might need some extra support. Well, guess what? They're there during the day, the whole day, to actually give them support instead of saying, well, looks like they're going to need some support. So we'll start to see the benefits of that as students matriculate up.
Yeah, I'm hoping, you touched on it, Marie touched on it, that one of the big benefits is the behavior issues go down.
Gives them a little bit more time on
Right.
how do you
It's
walk
just
down
a
the
lot of
hallway?
stress.
How do you work with your peers?
Yep.
What is it like to work in a small group, right? A lot of stations, you go into an elementary classroom, and students are not, in rows. They're in stations, and they're with a lot of different moving parts and adults. So that's just, in and of itself, we're going to see some significant changes.
Joanne, I just want to thank you too publicly. I know how hard this was in such a timely fashion. You put a lot of hours in. Thank you very much. You work really hard, and we all appreciate it.
Thank you. My staff helps quite a bit, and the administration and the schools, so thank you.
I don't think this has ever been done at this time before, as far as getting the budget out this early and working these numbers. Has it, Al, in your years of experience?
Seems early to me. I don't know.
I mean, it should be. I mean, this is the time we should be doing this. Last year, we got behind. We're always going to be waiting for a little bit of the state numbers. I know, Paul gets his budget, I think, like the last Monday in January, because the charter requires that. We're going to try to kind of marry it up like we're doing this one and have our first meeting in February be when we really do the budget presentation. Last year was tough for us, though, too, because we had the construction kind of questions. We're trying to implement the full day K numbers. There was just a lot of variables. We didn't end up putting our recommended budget out until the end of February.
Yes.
And so this year, we're about a month early. Ideally, we'll be able to have our budget hearing at the end of February and approve a budget, which will then really allow us to begin implementing the staffing plan for next year. So if we can come out of the gates with an approved budget, the first week in March, at least on the school committee level, we can start the advertisement and recruitment process for the number of positions. We're not going to have many, but for the number of positions that we have, so that we're actually going out and trying to get the very best either colleagues from other districts or the best crop kind of coming out of the universities to be able to fill some of our very difficult positions. We're not going to be in a position where we're competing for people, in May, June, July. If we can be advertising in March and starting the process earlier, we're going to be that much better off as a district.
Wow.
Do you anticipate any class size cuts, teachers like we've had at McCarthy with the 5th grade? Is that going to travel to the 6th grade?
Yeah, that's in here.
Yeah,
Okay.
we talked about
It's just the,
I missed that.
It up. It was
Yeah.
one of the items.
Oh,
that's
okay.
gonna
All right.
bump.
What we did last year with 5, we're doing with 6.
That's what I figured.
That's right.
Because we made the cut, and the class sizes are still, that's in the
Small.
class size report.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's still like, I think 22, 23, comparable to Parker, and they have 8 sections. So you wouldn't go from 8 sections up to 10.
Right.
You wouldn't bring it down to like 17 or 18. And being able to repurpose those positions is basically gonna allow us to do, say, the nurse, the ELL teacher, the English coordinator. That's what's able to have us do that, because we don't have the capacity to add like 5 or 6 new positions. We've got to repurpose some. But I think, again, what was significant is we're trying to do this in a fashion, and we've kind of looked at who will be involved and what their licensure is, that we can help people get into other jobs that they're licensed in the district, knowing, again, it might not be their first choice, so we absolutely get that. But they'll have a job, and that's, I think that actually says a lot.
They'll have a job, and we're going to fill positions that we've been talking about for a couple of years now that
Right.
are really, really important.
Right, correct.
I'd like to add one comment. We've been handing out praise to go back to the first part of the report and the outstanding achievement of our kids.
Yeah.
And this isn't a play to the union. It's my heartfelt comment. Our teachers are obviously doing a great job, or we wouldn't be achieving this. I'm confident in saying that because while I'm not in the school as much as I used to be, at Rotary today, we had 6 of our seniors come in. And if you get a chance, watch Lions Pride when our kids are on there because it's unbelievable. And the first thing out of their mouth when they come to Rotary to talk to us is how great the teachers are and the tremendous impact they had on them going through their 4 years. So I want to make sure our job is to provide you with the resources, and obviously you're doing a good job with them because the kids are doing a good job. We don't have any,
Field trips.
They didn't come through. I don't have any field trips today.
okay.
That was the last, no, that was my last item on the agenda. Like I said, I look forward to discussing this. It'll be online for the viewing audience. We'll email it to the town meeting reps. The Tuesday after school vacation week, which I believe is the 27th, 26th and 27th, will be our actual budget meeting. You know, we encourage people to come and talk and say, you know, we very much like this. We wish you'd consider something else. But I'm looking forward to that.
Are we considering a change of venue for the budget meeting since town meeting reps tend to kind of have an interest in that?
Personally, I would say no, only because this room is really conducive for like telecasting and things like that. And the last 2 years, we haven't really had a lot of interest. I think we'd be able to do it within this room.
Okay.
And I honestly, I don't see anything overly controversial in this document that's gonna cause like masses to come out. So I would personally say no, but I mean, that's something that, you know, you can always consider.
Plus, it's gonna be online. Will be able to hear from the reps if there's any issues and
Yeah.
if we start to see any kind of a groundswell.
Well, and I think for the town meeting reps too, Paul, are you still doing that pre-town meeting? Yeah, I mean, I would work with the town manager around the pre-town meeting. That's quite an event where, you know, he goes and kind of reviews the warrant articles. I can come and be there and talk about schools if town meeting reps have questions, just so that they're not asked to come out twice.
Paul, I apologize. I didn't even see you over there, and I do want to recognize and tell you how much we appreciate what you're doing for the schools. You work hard for the schools. It's evident. We're excited for this partnership, and we're excited for the transparency. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for everything you do for us.
I have nothing else tonight, no.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Unanimous.